Hey everybody, what's going on? This is Sam from Historic Travels and welcome to another video. Alright guys, well hey, welcome to part 3 of the complete story of William Murdoch, the Titanic's first officer. Now guys, I know I said this is going to be a 3-part series, but guess what guys, while I was filming it, I realized that there is way too much information to cover in this video, so guess what? It's going to be a 4-parter. But I guarantee you that on the 4th episode of the Murdoch series, we will finish his story, so just stand by for that. Alright everybody, well hey, with the intro out of the way, let's now get into today's video. We are going to resume Murdoch's story at 12:30 a.m. on board the RMS Titanic. At this point in time, Captain Smith had just given the order to begin filling all of the Titanic's lifeboats, and he also told his crew to lower the boats away as quickly as possible. Now, when Captain Smith gave the order to begin filling the lifeboats, he specifically said to fill the boats up with women and children first. Now, this order means, as the name implies, to fill the boats up with women and children first. However, if there are empty seats in the boat afterwards, it's okay to let men on. This is certainly how First Officer William Murdoch interpreted these orders. However, the other officer, who basically took charge of lowering all the Titanic's lifeboats on the port side, Second Officer Charles Lightoller, interpreted these orders differently. He interpreted the captain's orders of women and children first to mean women and children only, which means that no matter what, he was not going to let any men into any of the lifeboats. Now, I'm not going to be going into any detail in this video as to why Second Officer Charles Lightoller misinterpreted Captain Smith's orders of women and children first as women and children only. I do plan to cover all of that in a future video, so if you don't want to miss it, be sure you're subscribed to the YouTube channel and make sure you click the bell icon so you don't miss any future videos. Okay, now back to Murdoch. Now, because the prepping of the Titanic's lifeboats had been going on for quite some time leading up to the point where Captain Smith finally gave the all-clear to begin filling the boats and lowering them away, once Murdoch received that order from the captain, it really didn't take him very long to begin filling and lowering away the boats. In fact, the first lifeboat to be launched from Titanic would be launched by Murdoch, and this would happen roughly 15 minutes or so after Captain Smith gave the order to begin filling the boats and lowering away. So as you can see, Murdoch really wasn't messing around, and he was really going to do everything he could to get as many people off of the doomed liner as possible before the ship sank. Now, the first lifeboat that Murdoch attempted to lower away from the Titanic was lifeboat number 7. This lifeboat was located on the Titanic's starboard side just forward of the second funnel. Assisting Murdoch with this lifeboat was Third Officer Pittman. He, along with Murdoch, were doing everything they could to convince as many of the Titanic's passengers as possible to get into this boat before the ship went down. You see, there's a very curious thing that a lot of the passengers who would leave the Titanic in this boat said about how Murdoch was handling the loading of this boat. Murdoch gave no mention of the captain's orders of women and children first. He was simply trying to put as many people as possible into this boat before he lowered it over the ship's side. So that means that Murdoch didn't care who you were, men, women, children, whatever. If you were a passenger on the Titanic and you wanted to escape the ship in this boat, he let you go. However, despite all this, there weren't that many people who wanted to leave the Titanic in this boat. What you have to remember is, this is very early into the disaster, so not that many of the Titanic's passengers, if any at all, knew that the Titanic was sinking. And the Titanic's crew, including Murdoch, weren't really telling passengers that the ship was going down because they were trying to avoid a panic. So because of this, there weren't that many takers to get into lifeboat number 7. As this lifeboat lowered away from the Titanic, there were around 25 to 30 people in this boat. One of the passengers in this boat was passenger Margaret Hayes. She, along with her small Pomeranian dog, escaped the Titanic in this lifeboat. This lifeboat officially left the Titanic at 12:40 a.m. Now, with the exception of the whole trying to get people to board lifeboat number 7, the lowering away and launching of lifeboat number 7 went without any type of major incident. Now, as soon as lifeboat number 7 cleared the Titanic, Murdoch then headed out to begin working on the next lifeboat that he was going to lower away from the Titanic. Lifeboat number 5, which was stored on the boat deck directly beside where lifeboat number 7 was stored. Now, during the initial stages of prepping this boat, everything went without incident. However, what Murdoch would soon come to realize is that this is the first boat that he dealt with on this evening that had a pretty major incident happen with this boat. It was by no means the worst situation that he would encounter with the Titanic's lifeboats on this evening. However, I would consider it a bad omen of things to come. During the initial loading of lifeboat number 5, the boat was being worked on by obviously First Officer William Murdoch, Third Officer Pittman, and it seems like Fifth Officer Lowe was also around with the prepping of this lifeboat. And another person who all of you may know who was hanging around this boat was also the head of the White Star Line, J. Bruce Ismay. Now, as I previously stated, the initial prepping of this boat went without incident. Passengers boarded this boat, and yeah, everything was fine. However, there was one small incident with Ismay while this lifeboat was being prepped. It seems like that Ismay had a small little panic attack while they were loading up this boat, and he started screaming, lower away, hurry up, get this boat over the side. And then Fifth Officer Lowe actually got really fed up with Ismay and his behavior, and he basically yelled at him to back up and get away and everything. And Ismay turned to Lowe and said, hey, do you know who I am? And at this point, Lowe lost his patience with Ismay, and he yelled at him, you're a passenger, and I'm a ship's bloody officer. Now do as you're told. At this point, Ismay kind of woke up a little bit and he realized his mistake, so he apologized to Lowe, and then Ismay went off and did his own thing, while Lowe continued to assist with the prepping of lifeboat number 5. Now, there are those people out there that like to look at this incident between Ismay and Lowe as further evidence that Ismay was just this terrible person, and, he was pure evil, and he would abandon the ship and leave women and children on board and all this other stuff. But honestly, I don't really see it that way. You see, while I do acknowledge the fact that Ismay really didn't make himself look good, especially in the aftermath of the sinking, during the sinking, he stayed on board the Titanic until very close to the end. And that's not the behavior of somebody who would just abandon women and children, and try to save his own neck and everything. I mean, Ismay did try to encourage people to escape the ship and everything, and he did everything he could, considering that he was just a passenger on board the Titanic. You gotta remember that. But anyway, I like to look at this encounter between Ismay and Lowe like this. You see, Ismay had a small little mental breakdown, which is understandable given how major of a situation all of them were in. And then after Lowe snapped at him, and remember, Lowe was a fifth officer, and between Lowe's position with the company and Ismay's position with the company, Ismay was way up higher in the company than Lowe. And even with this, Ismay took that verbal beating from Lowe. It's just when Lowe yelled at him and he said that you're a passenger and I'm a ship's bloody officer, now do as you're told. Ismay, instead of snapping at him, went, oh, yeah, quite right. I'm sorry. Yep, you're right. Okay. And then he moved on. That to me signifies that Ismay was aware of what he was doing. He's like, yeah, I messed up. He's right. I was wrong. And Ismay simply walked away and let Lowe continue to do what he was doing. So, to me, that shows that Ismay really isn't as bad of a guy as a lot of people would like to claim. He just got overwhelmed in that situation. And throughout the whole sinking, he tried to help as many people as he could escape the ship before he left the ship much later in the disaster. Now, this little incident between Ismay and Lowe wasn't the big issue that happened with lifeboat number 5 that I was hinting at earlier. You see, the issue with lifeboat number 5 happened as this boat was being lowered over the Titanic side. Right before this boat began its process of being lowered away, First Officer William Murdoch put Third Officer Pittman in charge of the boat. Then, as the boat was slowly but surely making its way down to the water, Murdoch and his team had great difficulty in evenly lowering this boat down to the waterline. This was because the davits that lifeboat number 5 was connected to had recently been painted, and this was causing the ropes on these davits to get stuck. So because of this, the boat was basically jittering all the way down to the waterline. Now, the big issue with this happened as the boat was making its way down to the water. One of the davits, the rope got stuck in one end, but not the other. So as a result of this caused one side of the boat to keep getting lowered down, while the other side was basically stuck. And this caused a lot of the passengers in this boat to understandably get alarmed because it looked like that they were about to tip the boat over so far that it was going to spill all of its occupants into the sea. However, Murdoch quickly realized what was going on, and he stopped the lowering away until they could even the boat out, and then once they did this, they successfully got lifeboat number 5 down to the water without any further incident. Lifeboat number 5 left the Titanic at roughly 12:45 a.m. Now, the next lifeboat that Murdoch launched from the Titanic was lifeboat number 3. This lifeboat was positioned basically right beside where lifeboat number 5 was kept on the Titanic's boat deck. Are you guys seeing a pattern here with how Murdoch is handling launching the lifeboats? He's simply going from one boat to the next boat to the next boat and so on and so forth. Now, once Murdoch got all the passengers that were standing around this lifeboat into the boat, something curious happened. There was a large number of firemen that were standing up on the Titanic's boat deck that had abandoned the lower decks of the Titanic because their area of the ship had already been flooded, so they had nothing to do except come up on the boat deck and see what's going on. These firemen approached Murdoch and asked him if it would be okay if they got into this boat and left the Titanic. Murdoch saw that there were plenty of empty seats still in this boat. He said, yes, by all means, get into the boat. So these firemen got into the lifeboat and were successfully evacuated from the Titanic. Do you see how Murdoch is handling the evacuation? I mean, this is what you need to do. Do the women and children first thing, but then if there are empty seats left over and there's no one else around, let some men in. Let as many people as possible escape the Titanic. I mean, honestly, Murdoch has nothing but high praise from me with how he's handling the evacuation. Hey, Light Taller, you could learn a thing or two from Murdoch. Lifeboat number 3 was launched from the Titanic at 12:55 a.m., and there were roughly 40 people on board this lifeboat. After lifeboat number 3 had successfully cleared the ship, Murdoch then continued to head forward to begin working on the next lifeboat that he was going to launch from the ship, lifeboat number 1. Lifeboat number 1 was located at the very front of the Titanic's boat deck on the starboard side. However, the launching of this lifeboat would prove to be a little bit of a different type of challenge for Murdoch. Now, it's not a difficult challenge or anything, it's just different than all the other boats that he would have to deal with on board the Titanic on this particular evening. You see, lifeboat number 1, the way it was stored on the Titanic, well, it actually shared the same lifeboat davits as another lifeboat, collapsible lifeboat C. So basically there were 2 lifeboats stored directly beside each other on the boat deck, but not in the same way that the other boats are stored. This will all make sense when I show you this image. You see, this is a picture of lifeboat number 1. It's the lifeboat that you see hanging over the Titanic's starboard side. And then, as you can see, there's another boat located on the spot where this boat should be on the Titanic's boat deck, and that is collapsible lifeboat C. So basically, lifeboat number 1 is hanging over the Titanic side by default. This is just how this boat was stored on the ship. So what Murdoch would have to do is, he would have to launch lifeboat number 1, but anybody who would want to get into this boat would have to deal with, climbing over collapsible lifeboat C and stuff. This boat wasn't the easiest to access. So this is what I mean when I say that Murdoch had a challenge with dealing with loading and prepping this lifeboat. Now, due to the fact that lifeboat number 1 was more difficult for Murdoch and other members of the Titanic's crew and passengers to access, I'd say that's one of the reasons, while not the only reason, that what was about to happen with lifeboat number 1 actually happened. You see, lifeboat number 1 left the Titanic at 1:05 a.m., and this lifeboat only had 12 people on board. Yes, you heard me right. One of the lifeboats that left the Titanic had only 12 people on board. Now, there were multiple reasons for this. One of the reasons is, as I stated earlier, this boat was more difficult for Murdoch and the crew and passengers to access. But I think another reason why this boat left with so few people on board was because Murdoch was simply in a hurry to get this boat away from the Titanic. And this was because, as long as boat number 1 was connected to these davits that it was tied to, then Murdoch couldn't begin prepping and working on getting collapsible lifeboat C away from the Titanic. So, honestly, what I think happened was Murdoch was just like, okay, let's just fill this boat with whoever's around. Let's get this boat lowered away. That way we can begin prepping collapsible C. Because in his mind, if they didn't get lifeboat number 1 away from the Titanic, then it's quite possible that collapsible lifeboat C could end up being dragged down with the Titanic when the ship sank. After Murdoch successfully got lifeboat number 1 clear of the Titanic, he then headed to the aft end part of the ship's starboard side boat deck to begin the loading and launching of the lifeboats stored on that part of the ship. After he left the area where collapsible lifeboat C was stored, the Titanic's crew members that remained around collapsible C began the initial stages of prepping this boat. So they began to uncover the boat and pull the davits back in. They basically started the initial prepping that this boat needed before passengers could be loaded into the boat. However, you know what? I think we can talk about the other lifeboats that Murdoch worked on and Collapsible Sea in the next episode. Sorry guys, but I think this is the spot where we're going to have to pause Murdoch's story for now. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure you leave it a like. If you're new here, please subscribe to the channel. And thank you all so much for tuning in. You all are awesome, and I will see you all in the next one. Thanks so much for watching. You all have a great day.